welcome to Twilight Fables, where fairy tales take a darker turn. Tonight, we invite you to lose yourself in the haunting tale of the Red Slippers, a story not of vanity and elegance, but of obsession, madness, and a curse stitched in crimson thread. Listen close. The snow that fell over Grenthorne was never white. It settled on the village in smears of grey and ash, coating its crumbling cobblestone streets like the soot from a long dead hearth. No birds sang in Grenthorne, no flowers bloomed, and yet from this colourless world came Clara, too bright, too spirited, too alive. Clara's mother said she was born during a storm, a scream of wind and rain tearing through the sky. As the midwife cut the cord, "Your trouble from the start," she'd whisper, half proud, half afraid. Clara would just smile and spin around the room, the hem of her patched skirts flying like the wings of a bird she'd never seen. She had nothing, no father, no siblings, only her mother, a seamstress with crooked fingers and hollow eyes, and the small cottage that leaned like it was tired of standing. Still, Clara dreamed, not of princes or riches, but of music and movement. Her bare feet knew every creak in their floorboards, every crunch of frost beneath them, as she danced through the fields, wild and laughing, like something the forest had let loose. She would dance anywhere, everywhere, at market stalls, in graveyards, in front of the chapel even. The townspeople scolded her, called her vain, strange, cursed, but they watched her, always watched her. "God frowns on pride," old Mother Elski muttered once, spitting into the snow as Clara passed. Clara hadn't replied. She was used to it. She didn't dance for them. She danced because she had to. When she stopped, her chest felt heavy, her legs itched with silence, her dreams throbbed with drums no one else heard. Then, one Sunday, the preacher's wife died. No one cried. No one even seemed surprised. She'd been sick for years, a shriveled thing, wrapped in black veils and bitterness. Clara remembered her most for the cane she carried, not to walk with, but to point at sinners in the chapel. When the bell rang for her funeral, Clara stood outside the church and watched. The villagers filed in with their heads bowed, their breath puffing from their mouths like ghosts. Clara stayed on the steps. She had no shoes. That was when she saw the box. It was small, wooden, and nestled in a pile of discarded wreaths behind the chapel. The lid was half open, and something inside glowed, not with light, but with colour, a blood-rich velvet red. Clara knelt, heart thudding. Inside were slippers, dainty and fine, with ribbons like coiled snakes, and soles so smooth they shimmered. No one was watching. No one would miss them. She slipped them on. The moment the leather kissed her skin, a warmth surged through her bones. Her spine straightened, her toes pointed, her arms floated without command, and then, without music, without thought, she danced. She spun through the snow, leapt down the chapel steps, twirled past the mourners, who gasped and clutched their rosaries. She danced as if her body no longer belonged to her, fluid, graceful, unstoppable. The preacher yelled, someone screamed, her mother fainted, and still Clara danced. The world blurred, her heart pounded in rhythm with something dark and deep. She didn't stop until her body collapsed into the street, her chest heaving, lips blue. She barely remembered the hands that dragged her home. When she woke, the slippers were gone. At first, she thought it had been a dream. but her feet were blistered raw. The floorboards near her bed were scorched with strange crescent-shaped burns. Her mother stood over her, trembling. "You brought the devil into this house," she hissed. "You wore the slippers." Clara tried to speak, but her voice cracked like ice. Her mother grabbed her by the arm. "Do you want to end up like the preacher's wife?" What do you mean?" Her mother only stared. She danced too, long ago, before the cane, before the veil. They said she'd been beautiful once, danced right into madness. The slippers were hers, and they buried her in them. Or so they thought. That night, Clara lay in bed, unable to sleep. Her legs twitched beneath the blanket. Her toes flexed, hungry. She could still feel them, the slippers, their embrace, their power, the way they made her seen. She didn't care what the whispers said. She didn't care if it was sin or sorcery. She wanted them back. The next morning, she snuck back to the chapel, but the box was gone. Not a trace remained. The grave was sealed. The villagers avoided her eyes. Her mother locked the doors, but strange things began to happen. She saw red shapes in her dreams, dancing feet that bled as they moved. Footsteps appeared on their floors at night, leading from her bed to the hearth and back again, always in circles, always smudged in ash. Her mother grew sick, pale and distant. The house creaked with voices no one could place. And then came the knocking. 3 taps every night from inside the wardrobe. Clara tried to resist. She tried to pray, to read, to sit still. But the longer she denied it, the more it hurt. Her joints ached, her muscles cramped, her vision blurred with red at the corners, until one night she could take no more. She approached the wardrobe. It opened before she touched it. Inside, on the highest shelf, sat the slippers, clean, bright, waiting. Her fingers trembled as she reached for them. "No," whispered her mother from the doorway, voice thin and broken. "Don't you understand? They choose who wears them, and they never let go." Clara turned to her, the shoes already in her hands. "I don't care," she said, her voice not her own, and she put them on. That night, Grenthorne watched again. From the windows, from the cracks in shutters, from behind drawn curtains, they watched Clara dance through the streets, her dress torn, her face wild, her feet bleeding but moving still. She danced through mud, over gravestones, across the frozen river. She danced while the wind howled, and the trees twisted like broken fingers. She danced because she could not stop, and the slippers, slick with red, shone like rubies beneath the moon. The wind groaned through the rafters of Grenthorne like a dirge. By morning the village was silent. No one left their homes. No one fetched water. No one gathered by the chapel steps. Only the preacher stood outside, pale and shivering, clutching a crooked wooden cross in his fist. "She's cursed," he muttered to no one. "It's begun again." Clara didn't sleep, not anymore. She sat by the hearth, knees hugged to her chest, hair soaked in sweat, her hands shaking with exhaustion. The slippers were still on her feet. She tried everything, cutting the ribbons, burning the laces, even plunging her legs into the icy river. But the shoes clung to her like skin, stitching themselves deeper each time she resisted. Her mother wouldn't come near her. She sat in the corner of the cottage, rocking, whispering prayers to saints whose name she barely remembered. Every so often, she would glance at Clara with pity, fear, and something deeper, recognition. "Tell me the truth," Clara begged. "What are they?" Her mother turned her face to the shadows. Not what, who. Clara's descent was not swift. It came slowly, like fog curling into an open mouth. At first, she only danced at night. Her body would move on its own, puppeted by a force older than thought. The moment the sun dipped below the horizon, her limbs would jerk forward, her toes would rise, and the music in her mind would return. A high, keening melody, bone flutes, drum beats like the cracking of knuckles. Then it crept into the day. She would be walking through the woods, gathering sticks, and her feet would twist into a turn. She would be standing still, and suddenly she'd twirl without warning, slamming into walls, knocking over pots, bruising her arms. The shoes demanded motion, constant, frantic, hungry motion. Sleep became a memory. Food turned to ash in her mouth. Her cheeks hollowed, her fingernails splintered, but her eyes glowed, a feverish crimson shimmer. Some villagers claimed they saw flickers of flame dancing in her pupils. And still she danced. One morning, Clara awoke to the sound of humming. Not her mother, not the wind. It came from beneath the floorboards. She rose, her legs trembling, slippers twitching as if impatient. The boards creaked beneath her as she followed the sound to the far side of the cottage. An old wardrobe no one used anymore, too heavy to move, too warped to open. The humming grew louder. She knelt, pressed her ear against the wood. It was a child's voice. "Dance with me," it sang softly, over and over. "Dance, dance, till your feet are gone." Clara stumbled back, her chest heaving. She slammed the door shut and fled the house, slipping into the woods, her breath fogging before her in the morning cold. The forest had always been her refuge, but now even the trees leaned away from her path. Birds fell silent as she passed. The wind carried the distant rustle of unseen footsteps. She stopped only when she reached the wishing tree. It was ancient, older than the village, older than memory, charred black, leafless, its bark covered in nails, coins, locks of hair. People came to it in secret, whispering pleas to the twisted trunk, leaving tokens in hopes of luck or love or vengeance. Clara had never dared before, but she was no longer afraid. She stepped forward and whispered, "Make it stop." The wind shifted, the branches rattled like teeth, and then the bark cracked open, a slit like a mouth. From it dropped a key, small, iron, wet with sap. She caught it before it hit the ground. Her pulse thundered. A door. There was a door. But where? That night, she returned home to find her mother gone. No note, no trace, only a single torn scrap of fabric nailed to the front door. The same fabric her mother wore around her wrist for mourning. Blood dotted the threshold. Inside, the house was cold, too cold. The fire had gone out. The air reeked of old iron. And the wardrobe stood open. Darkness spilled from within, not shadow, darkness. A thick, oozing fog that slithered across the floor like a living thing. Clara backed away, but the slippers had already moved, step slide, turn. She fought it, dug her fingers into the doorframe. But her legs obeyed the rhythm, not her will. She was dancing again, arms aloft, head thrown back, twirling toward the wardrobe as if it were a stage, as if something inside waited to applaud. She screamed, and the wardrobe swallowed her. She fell for hours, or seconds, or years. Time unravelled like thread. When she landed, it was not on wood or stone, but ash. Fine white ash, like the bones of 1,000 dancers ground to dust. The sky above was grey and boiling. A forest of dead trees loomed ahead, their branches tangled into clawed gestures. From somewhere far off, a bell tolled, a deep, sorrowful sound, and she was not alone. Figures stood in the trees, women in tattered dresses, men in shredded coats, all barefoot, or dancing in place. Their movements were slow, exhausted, but continuous. Their eyes were hollow, their feet bled, and on each of their faces a smile stretched too wide. The shoes, they all wore them. Clara tried to cry out, but her voice was gone. The ash clung to her lips. Her legs moved again, dragging her forward into the cursed procession. A figure stepped from the shadows. She wore a veil. Her eyes were sewn shut with thread. Clara recognized her, the preacher's wife. "You came too late," she said, with no mouth. Clara fell to her knees. "Please," she rasped. "How do I stop it?" The veiled woman pointed. There, deep in the woods, stood a tower. It was twisted, narrow, leaning as if tired. Black smoke curled from its highest window, and at its base, a locked iron door. The key in Clara's hand grew warm. She ran, or rather, the shoes carried her, faster than she had ever moved, over ash, over bone, past dancers who wept but didn't stop. She reached the tower. The key turned on its own. The door yawned open. Inside, candles burned on every stair, their flames blue. The walls were carved with names, hundreds, thousands, all women, all crossed out, except one, Clara. She ascended, the music in her head louder now, deafening. At the top, a chamber, empty, except for a loom made of human bones, and behind it a woman, tall, gaunt, dressed in spider silk robes. Her face was blank, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, only smooth skin, and yet she spoke. "I wove them for you, Clara fell. You made them, the slippers. I make all of them. I spin the hunger. I stitch the rhythm. I lace the price." "Why me?" Clara whispered. The faceless woman tilted her head. "Because you danced before you were asked." Clara screamed, charged, tore at the loom, shattered the bone frame, burned the silken threads. The woman didn't flinch. "You can break the loom," she said, "but the dance is yours now. It lives in your blood. It will call to others." The slippers pulsed, warm, alive. "Take them," Clara hissed. "I don't want them." The woman finally smiled. "But they want you." The room dissolved. Clara awoke in her bed. The wardrobe was shut. The house was silent. Her mother stood in the doorway, eyes dull. "Did you dance?" Clara nodded. Her mother stepped aside. Behind her, a little girl waited, barefoot, eyes bright. She pointed at Clara's feet. "I want them." Clara didn't speak for days. The little girl was gone when she woke, if she had ever truly been there. Her mother refused to talk about it, and Clara didn't push. Something in her had changed. She could feel it in her bones, in the spaces between her heartbeats. The slippers were still on her feet, but they no longer throbbed with motion. They sat dormant, silent, slick, and warm like resting animals. The house was quiet, too quiet. The villagers no longer approached. Clara could see them from the window, skirting the path around their cottage, muttering prayers as they passed. The preacher had begun carving a circle of salt and ash around the chapel. The forest animals had fled. Even the wind seemed to avoid their walls now, curling away with a mournful sigh. Clara's mother spent most days sitting in a rocking chair by the fire, holding a bundle of black thread in her lap. She refused to explain where she'd gone, what had happened, while Clara was inside the tower. Her skin looked thinner, her fingers shook when she sewed. Clara spent her days staring at her feet. She couldn't remove the slippers, not by pulling, not by cutting, not even fire had loosened their grip. They were part of her now, fused into her flesh. She had stopped trying to resist, but in the deepest hours of night, when the moon cast long fingers across the room, she would feel them flex, just slightly, just enough to remind her they were alive. She began to see them, other dancers, in dreams, in the woods, in reflections. They would flicker at the edge of her vision, women with slit feet and shattered ankles, their bodies forever moving, caught in the same doomed rhythm. They spun in abandoned homes, on rooftops, along the frozen river. She once saw one clinging to the underside of a bridge, her face pressed against the ice, eyes wide and sightless, her legs still twitching. The slippers, it seemed, had a history, a family, a legacy stitched in blood. Clara began keeping a journal. She recorded the appearances, the visions, the whispers. But one name appeared over and over again. Lisette. She didn't know how she knew it. No one in Grenthorne bore the name, but it came to her again and again, carved into trees, scrawled into the frost on her window, whispered in the rustle of her blankets, and in her dreams a voice called to her, "Lisette dances still." The fever returned. It began with a heat in her chest, a pulsing throb in her ribs that beat in sync with a far-off drum she couldn't find. Her feet twitched, her vision blurred, and then one night she woke to find herself standing in the forest, barefoot. The slippers were gone. For a moment, hope surged through her. Then she looked down. Her feet were bleeding. Ribbons of flesh curled from her heels. Her toes had been worn to the bone, and yet she'd never felt lighter. She followed the path of blood through the trees. Her feet moved without effort, without thought. There was no pain, no fear, only music. She came to a clearing she'd never seen before. At the centre stood a woman, tall, pale, dressed in crimson, and on her feet Clara's slippers, except they weren't hers anymore. The woman turned. Her eyes were hollow sockets filled with ash. Her mouth hung open in a silent scream. Her hair floated like mist, and still she danced. Clara stepped back. The woman followed, step for step, turn for turn. The forest spun with them, trees blurring into black and red, the ground melting into shadow. Their bodies moved in tandem, a mirror of sorrow and rage. Clara's blood painted the earth. The woman left no trace. "You are Lisette," Clara gasped. The woman stopped. The wind stilled. Lisette tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "No," she whispered, her voice layered with hundreds of others. "You are." Clara woke in bed again, but her feet were raw and bandaged. Her mother stood at the door, face drained of colour. "You went to the clearing," she said. "Didn't you?" "What is it?" Clara whispered. "Who is Lisette?" Her mother didn't answer. Instead, she crossed the room and reached for the wardrobe. "I didn't want to show you this," she said. From beneath a false floorboard, she pulled out a bundle, wrapped in silk, tied with red thread. Inside a diary, the name on the first page, Lisette Verman. Clara's hands trembled as she opened it. Page after page of elegant handwriting. "The music finds me in sleep. The slippers burn, but I need them. I am not me without them. I am not me at all." Lisette had once lived in Grenthorne, a dancer, a prodigy, beloved, worshipped, until the shoes, until the madness, until she vanished into the forest one night, never to be seen again, except she was, over and over again, reborn in every girl who danced too freely, too joyfully, too willfully. Clara slammed the book shut. "I'm not her," she said, but the slippers whispered otherwise. That evening, her mother gave her a knife. "I should have done this to myself," she said, tears falling, "but I was afraid and weak, and now it's yours to finish." Clara stared at the blade. The edge gleamed like moonlight. "I'll bleed out," she whispered. "You'll be free." But when she brought the knife to her ankle, the slippers pulsed angrily. Her hands spasmed. The blade clattered to the floor. A voice rang in her skull. "You belong to me." Clara fell to her knees, gasping. And from the shadows, Lisette smiled. The preacher came the next day. He bore salt and scripture, holy water, a hammer. "I should have burned you when you were a child," he muttered. Clara didn't resist. He poured salt in a circle around her, chanted ancient verses, and lit a flame in a black iron bowl. But when he tried to step into the circle, the slippers moved. Clara didn't touch him. She didn't have to. The shoes launched her forward, her body spinning in an arc of red and smoke. The preacher screamed as the fire leapt into his robes. His voice rose to a shriek, and then to silence. Clara stood over his charred remains and smiled. Her mother fled that night, left nothing behind but a locked door and a name carved into the wall above Clara's bed. Lisette. The townspeople no longer whispered. They ran. The chapel was boarded shut. The well was poisoned. The streets emptied. Clara danced through it all, and behind her the forest came to life. Figures in red, girls with slit feet, dancers without faces, a parade of lost souls. And at the front, Clara, smiling forever. By the time spring bled into Grenthorne, the village was no longer recognisable. The rooftops sagged beneath ivy like crawling veins. The chapel's cross had snapped cleanly in two. Its shattered halves sunk into the scorched altar. The well, once the town's lifeblood, festered with dark water, thick and churning with moss and memory. And above it all, Clara danced. She no longer needed food, no longer needed rest. The slippers fed her, sustained her, on something older than hunger, richer than flesh. Her eyes no longer blinked, her skin no longer bruised. Her heart beat only to the rhythm echoing in her mind, the drumming of ancient feet, the chorus of lost dancers. Clara was no longer Clara. She was Lisette reborn. The forest spread its fingers, creeping inch by inch toward the village centre. It moved like smoke, silent, suffocating, unrelenting. Trees sprouted overnight in the footprints of the dancers. Roots cracked through stone walls. Moss bloomed in the mouths of forgotten statues. And at night, from every direction, they came, drawn by whispers, pulled by rhythm. Girls, dozens, then hundreds. They arrived in dreams, walking on air, or in the flesh, barefoot and dazed, trailing ribbons and red string. From neighbouring towns, distant coasts, unnamed places, they came with bleeding heels and glassy eyes, and once they entered the circle of Grenthorne, they never left. They danced. Some laughed, some screamed. Most were silent, and Clara led them through graveyards, through ruins, through streets overgrown with thorns. Her body spun in perfect arcs, her hands slicing the air with elegance and cruelty. The ground behind her glistened with the blood of devotion. They called it the Red Procession. The villagers that remained locked their doors and stuffed cloth in their ears, but it never helped. The sound always found them, the tapping, the whispering, the soft shuffle of feet on old stone. And then, one by one, their children disappeared. There was a man who refused to run. His name was Brother Thorn, a former monk, turned gardener, turned hermit. He lived in a shack at the edge of the forest and tended to a patch of thorn apples and lavender. For years he kept to himself, but when the children vanished, he emerged, not with weapons, with stories. He knew the tale, or thought he did. Lisette Vermain, the first dancer, a girl cursed not by vanity, but vengeance, betrayed by a nobleman, murdered, buried barefoot. Her spirit had returned with a hunger, not to be remembered, but to be felt. He said the slippers were sewn from her burial gown, that her bones lined their souls, that each girl who wore them became a vessel, a wick for Lisette's flame, and he believed Clara could still be saved. He found her at the wishing tree. She stood beneath its gnarled limbs, red threads fluttering from every branch, like veins in the wind. Dozens of girls danced in rings around her, their hands clasped, their feet skipping in time to a song only they could hear. Brother Thorn stepped into the clearing and called her name. She turned. Her face was ageless, her mouth painted in ash. Her eyes no longer burned. They shimmered like glass over molten coals. "You are not Clara," he said, "but she's still inside you." She tilted her head, curious. "I can help," he said, stepping forward. The slippers twitched. Clara raised one hand, and the dancers froze. Brother Thorn stopped. "The story is wrong," he whispered. Lisette wasn't cursed. She was trying to escape. Clara blinked. The wind fell still. He opened a small satchel and withdrew a single item. A child's shoe, torn, mud-stained, ordinary. This was hers, he said. Lisette's real slipper. from before she was taken. I found it buried beneath the chapel." He held it out. Clara stared. For a moment her hands trembled. The dancers wept, and the slippers on her feet tightened. The scream that tore from Clara's throat shattered every window in Grenthorne. The ground split at her feet. Roots exploded from the soil, twisting into a spiral. The sky turned black. A torrent of voices erupted from the trees, crying, laughing, pleading. The forest moaned as if in labour. Clara clutched her head. Her legs moved involuntarily, spinning faster and faster until she became a blur of red and gold. The dancers followed suit, their bodies writhing in frantic circles. Their eyes rolled white, their feet flaying open from the pace. Blood painted the clearing like ink. Brother Thorn fell to his knees, sobbing. "Clara," he whispered, "fight her." But Clara was no longer there. Lisette stood in her place. She raised her hand, and silence fell. The earth swallowed Brother Thorn. Roots coiled around his limbs like serpents. The wishing tree groaned and bloomed crimson flowers for the first time in centuries. The child's slipper he had brought burst into flame, and Clara, Lisette, watched it burn with a small, satisfied smile. The rebellion was over, but the memory lingered. Lisette, for all her power, was not without flaw. The slippers fed on longing, on hunger, on grief, but they feared something. Stillness. On the nights when no girls danced, when no one watched, when the wind held its breath, Clara could feel it. A crack in the rhythm, a flicker in the flame. She began to test it. Each time she stopped dancing, even for a moment, she heard Lisette scream inside her skull. The slippers pulsed with panic. She began sealing moments of stillness, just seconds, a breath, a blink, a pause between twirls. It was enough to make Lisette tremble. She began to dream of the tower again, but this time she wasn't alone. The loom of bones was shattered, the faceless woman gone. Instead, a girl sat on the floor, Clara. The real Clara, dirty, thin, afraid, but alive. "Are you me?" Clara asked. Lisette, no, the false Clara, nodded. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Clara looked up. "You can end it," she said, "but you have to stop dancing." The next morning, the dancers gathered again. Hundreds now. Lisette stood on the broken altar of the chapel, her arms raised like a conductor's. The music thundered through the ruins, but this time she hesitated, and then she stopped. One heartbeat, 2, 3, silence. The dancers fell still. The slippers shrieked. Clara fell to the ground, blood pouring from her nose, her mouth, her ears. The slippers convulsed on her feet. Cracks split their soles. The red faded to grey. Lisette screamed in rage, her form flickering like fire in the wind. And for the first time in centuries, the music stopped. Clara awoke in the woods, barefoot. The slippers lay beside her, broken, empty, deflated like skin with no bone. The sky was pale, the trees were still, the girls were gone, and from the chapel, bells rang once more, not in mourning, in release. The chapel bells rang through the ruined streets of Grenthorne, like a song long forgotten. Their notes were thin, cracked from disuse, but beautiful in their own way, fragile and defiant, like a candle lit in the wind. Clara wandered barefoot through the village square. The slippers were gone, not just discarded, vanished, as if their presence had never existed, save for the red burns still curled around her ankles like brands. Her feet were blistered, calloused, bleeding, but they were her own again. The weight of silence crushed her. She wasn't sure how long she'd been lost to the dance. Days, months, years. The village she remembered was buried beneath moss and ruin. Half the buildings had collapsed. Ivy-claimed doorways like a greedy hand. Stone angels from the graveyard lay face down in the mud. The people were gone. All of them. No smoke curled from chimneys. No laughter spilled from taverns. Even the birds, emboldened by the stillness, refused to sing. Only Clara remained. Clara and the grave. She found it behind the chapel, a simple stone cracked with age, its engraving barely visible beneath lichen and claw marks. LV she danced. Clara knelt. The earth was soft, disturbed. Something had clawed at it from beneath, roots pulled away like frightened limbs. Beneath them she saw remnants, a veil torn and stained, a jawbone, a single fingernail still lacquered red, Lizette's grave, and it was empty. She tried to speak, but no words came. Her throat was dry, her lips split. Her body remembered the rhythm, the hunger, but her heart rejected it now. The music had gone quiet, but not dead. It waited. Clara placed her hand on the grave. "I'm not you," she whispered. "I never was." Something shifted beneath the dirt. Not an answer, a warning. That night, she returned to her family's cottage. The door was ajar. Dust thickened the air like fog. Her mother's chair still sat by the fire, thread and needle frozen mid-stitch. A half-finished doll lay in her lap. Its face was blank, its feet crimson. Clara picked it up. The hair on her arms rose. She opened the wardrobe. Inside, instead of clothing, she found rows and rows of shoes, all red, all different. Slippers, boots, heels, sandals, some beautiful, some grotesque, some child-sized, others impossibly narrow, almost bird-like. They hung from hooks, balanced on shelves, crammed into corners. Clara backed away, her heart pounding. Her mother hadn't fled. She had been collecting, curating, feeding the legend. Clara turned to flee and found the little girl again, standing in the doorway, barefoot, smiling. "I want them," she said softly. Clara's blood turned to ice. "No, they're gone." The girl tilted her head. "I didn't mean yours." She held up a box, and inside, freshly polished, stitched with gleaming thread, was a new pair of red slippers. Clara screamed. She ran, through the woods, over the river, into the thickets of Grenthorne's edge. The trees seemed to close behind her, branches scratching at her arms like hands trying to hold her back. She didn't stop until she reached the burned stump of the wishing tree. The offerings were gone. The bark was blackened. Its twisted mouth was sealed with stone. She collapsed at its base, sobbing. "I stopped," she choked. "I let go. Why isn't it over?" From the shadows, a voice replied, "It never ends. It simply chooses someone else." She looked up. Lisette stood across from her, but she was different now. Pale, quiet, still. She no longer moved like a dancer, only like a ghost. "I didn't ask for this," Clara whispered. Lisette nodded. "Nor did I." They sat in silence, and then Lisette knelt beside her. Clara flinched, but Lisette didn't strike, didn't scream. She reached into her chest, literally, her hand vanishing into the illusion of flesh, and drew out something small, a single black ribbon. It writhed in her fingers like smoke. Clara stared. "What is it?" Lisette pressed it into her palm. "Your turn to bind it," and she vanished. Clara awoke beside the tree, with the ribbon clutched in her fist. It pulsed with warmth, the same warmth the slippers once gave off, but it didn't hurt, not yet. She returned to the cottage. The little girl was gone, so was the box. She placed the ribbon into the old wardrobe and slammed it shut. Then she nailed the door closed. Then she poured salt around the floorboards. Then she carved symbols into the walls, symbols from the diary, from the loom, from the tower, and she waited. Days passed, then weeks. She began to hear stories from travellers, stragglers, who passed through Grenthorne, unaware of its history. They spoke of girls disappearing in the night, of whispers in cobblestone alleys, of children humming songs no one remembered teaching them. The curse was spreading again, but slower, more cautious, like a beast licking its wounds. Clara left the village in secret one dawn, wrapped in her mother's cloak. She walked barefoot, and for the first time in years, her steps were her own. Clara wandered far from Grenthorne, through valleys choked in fog, over rivers churning with broken ice, past villages that recoiled at her arrival, locking doors and whispering prayers when they saw the red welts curling around her ankles like scars from shackles. She said nothing, offered no name. She passed like smoke, like myth. But in every town she left behind, there came whispers of girls disappearing, of dancing shadows, of music playing with no source, of red slippers. Clara knew the curse had scattered like seeds in the wind, and somewhere, someone was stitching again. She reached a city unlike any she had ever known. Wide, gleaming, bustling with motion. Bells rang on every corner. Street performers twirled in the square. Dancers practiced in open courtyards, their feet tapping like rain. People smiled, but their eyes flicked to her feet, always her feet. A grand theatre stood in the city's centre, rising above the rooftops like a crown of black stone and velvet banners. It called to her in a way nothing else had since the slippers were torn away, and inside it she saw her, the girl. Not the child from Grenthorne, but another, older, 16, maybe 17, hair braided with ribbons, eyes alight with hope. She danced on the open floor like she'd been born to move. Clara knew the rhythm instantly. It wasn't hers, it was Lisette's. Slower now, seductive, laced with longing, not rage. But beneath the grace, Clara saw the signs, the twitch of the heel, the fluttering fingers, the tiny, almost invisible tremble of the girl's jaw, as if smiling through clenched teeth. Clara watched until the girl collapsed in exhaustion, breath ragged, eyes glazed, and then Clara turned to the director standing nearby. "Where did she get the shoes?" she asked. The woman frowned. "They were gifted from a sponsor." Clara's mouth went dry. "Can I see them?" The girl's dressing room smelled of powder and wilting flowers. She sat hunched before a cracked mirror, massaging her blistered feet. The slippers lay beside her, red velvet soft, stitched with golden thread that glinted like spider silk. Clara knelt. The girl flinched. "Don't be afraid," Clara said softly. "They haven't bound to you fully yet." The girl blinked. "What are you talking about? Do they ever stop moving, even when you sleep?" The girl's lip trembled. "I thought it was just nerves." "It's not." Clara lifted the slipper. It twitched in her hand, still warm, still breathing. "I thought it was a blessing," the girl whispered. "They made me dance better, stronger." Clara smiled sadly. "They always do, at first." That night, Clara returned to the theatre alone. She broke into the archives beneath the stage, searching through old programs, donor lists, sponsorship logs. She found what she feared she would: a red wax seal shaped like a dancer's foot. The signature beneath it read only one word: Marcheline. She didn't know the name, but it felt familiar. She dug deeper. Dozens of dancers, all gifted, all vanished. No forwarding address, no records of departure, simply gone. She sat in the dark, surrounded by dust and the smell of old ink and mildew, the truth pressing down on her like a tomb. Someone, something, was distributing the curse now, modernized, marketed, mass-produced. She returned to the girl's dressing room just before dawn. The slippers were already back on her feet. She was dancing in her sleep. Tears slid down her cheeks. Clara knelt and tried to remove them, but the ribbon bit her fingers, drawing blood. Clara took out the black ribbon she'd hidden in her coat. Lizette's gift. It writhed in her palm, a thread not yet sewn. Clara took a deep breath, and she wrapped the black ribbon around the red ones, slowly, carefully, binding rather than cutting. The slippers twitched, hissed, flexed, but they didn't resist. When Clara finished, the shoes lay still. The girl woke, gasping. "What did you do?" Clara touched her face. "I slowed the thread." The girl began to cry. She left the city by nightfall. The black ribbon remained behind, woven into the slippers, a temporary stopgap, a tourniquet for a bleeding curse. But Clara knew it wouldn't last. Lizette's hunger was deep, and the dance was never sated for long. Someone was feeding it, and now Clara had a name: Marcheline. The name echoed in her dreams. Not a woman, not exactly, something older, a needle without mercy, a seamstress who stitched souls into fabric and sold the results to those who crave power without price. Clara saw glimpses of her in sleep, long fingers, empty eyes, a spindle that spun without thread. She woke each morning with a taste of dust on her tongue and ash beneath her nails. Marcheline was waiting, and worse, she knew Clara was coming. Weeks passed. Clara followed rumours like breadcrumbs. A girl who danced herself into a coma in Briarwick. A troupe in Droshelm whose members had all vanished before opening night. a woman in the capital, found spinning in a fountain, slippers soaked in her own blood, eyes rolled back into her skull. All wore red, all were gifts, all were signed with the wax seal. Clara grew colder, harder. She no longer feared the music. She understood it now. The rhythm was not a beat. It was a map, a pulse leading her forward, deeper into the web. She was no longer the hunted. She was the thread pulled taut. And Marcheline would feel the tug soon enough. Clara's journey brought her to the threshold of the forgotten, beyond the borders of no maps, where roads twisted into each other like tangled string, where rivers flowed against gravity, and fog clung to your mind more than your skin. She found it, the seam. No one called it that aloud. Most didn't know it existed, but the air was different here, stitched, like fabric pulling at itself, trembling under an unseen tension. The birds stopped singing. Trees leaned at impossible angles, their bark threaded with strands of red silk instead of moss. Clara walked for days through the shifting mist. She didn't eat, she didn't sleep. Time no longer moved forward. It coiled in place, rewinding and looping like a melody repeated too many times. And then, one night, she saw the tower. It rose from a lake of ink. No bridge, no path, just a narrow thread stretching across the surface of the water, a tightrope of red. At the far end, the tower leaned against the sky like a broken needle. Its windows glowed with a faint pink light, as if lit from within by a dying fire. Clara stepped onto the thread. It did not shake. The walk took hours, or a blink. She couldn't tell. But when she reached the door, it was already open. No hinges, no handle, just a split in the tower's surface, as if someone had carved it open with a single swipe of a claw. Inside, the walls were velvet, red, lined with shoes, thousands, some pristine, some bloody, some made for infants, others impossibly long. Some didn't even look human. They twitched as she passed, and the further she walked, the more the air filled with the sound of breathing. Not hers. The shoes were breathing. Clara kept moving until she reached the centre of the tower. There was no throne, no audience, only a loom, far larger than the one in Lisette's tower. It stretched to the ceiling, made of bone, sinew, and gold thread. It shimmered with living strands, red, black, white, blue, all moving on their own, twisting and weaving into garments that vanished into the walls. And before it sat Marcheline. She did not turn to face Clara. She didn't need to. Lisette was clumsy, Marcheline said, her voice smooth as silk soaked in wine. She poured all her rage into the dance and left no space for seduction. But you, her fingers moved, plucking threads from the air. You bring nuance. Clara didn't speak. Marcheline continued. I didn't curse her, you know. She came to me willingly, asked for beauty, power, immortality. I gave her the shoes, and when she lost herself, she blamed me. Clara took a step forward. I've seen the girls, the pain, and yet they come, Marcheline replied, her back still turned. Every generation, every stage, they beg me for an edge, for grace, for glory. What do you think your slippers were? I never asked for them. Your mother did. Clara froze. She wanted you to rise above the village, to dance for royalty. She came to my envoy at the market with tears in her eyes. She offered me blood, not hers, yours. The loom slowed. Marcheline finally turned. She had no face, only a smile, made of thread. Clara stepped back. "No," she whispered. "Yes," Marcheline said. "You're not a victim. You're a transaction." She rose from the loom, her body stretched unnaturally tall. Her dress clung to her like second skin, made from thousands of tiny writhing ribbons. She extended her hand. "I could take you back," she said. "You would never age, never tire. You could dance until the stars rot. You would be the first among the red." Clara reached into her coat. She still carried it, Lizette's ribbon, black, unworn. She held it up. "I brought this to bind you," Clara said. Marcheline laughed. "You think thread can hold me?" "No," Clara said. "But I'm not going to tie you." She tied it around her own wrist. Marcheline stopped. "What are you doing?" "Finishing it." The ribbon tightened, burned, flared, and then sank into her skin. Clara screamed, every nerve ignited. The tower shuddered. The shoes on the walls shrieked in unison. The loom sparked, its threads recoiling. Marcheline lunged, but Clara was already moving, faster than she ever had. Her feet struck the floor like thunder. Her arms carved the air like knives. She wasn't dancing for joy or power. She was dancing for war. The tower couldn't hold her rhythm. Cracks spread along the floor. Flames burst from the seams. Marcheline stumbled, the ribbons unravelling from her arms, her face unravelling into strings. Clara spun faster. Lizette's voice echoed in her head. "She stitched us one by one. Now let her wear us." The red threads from the loom snapped and tangled around Marcheline's body. They pierced her skin, sewed her limbs in place, tied her to the very loom she'd fed for centuries. She howled. Clara leapt and cut the final thread with her teeth. The tower collapsed. The lake boiled. The shoes burned. Clara woke in a field of white poppies, alone. The ribbon around her wrist was gone, but her feet were whole. The burns on her ankles healed. The dance, silent. For the first time since childhood, she felt no pull, no rhythm, no breath that wasn't her own. She had ended it, not just the curse, the source. Marcheline's name was no longer a whisper. It was ash. She returned to the cities, to the villages, to Grenthorne. And everywhere the music had stopped, girls slept peacefully, stages sat silent, and the red slippers were no more. Clara buried the last remnants in the field behind her mother's cottage. A single shard of gold thread, a scrap of velvet, and a name carved into a stone. Not Lisette, not Marcheline, her own. Clara. Years passed. Grenthorne slowly healed. The trees stopped leaning in. The fog lifted. The wishing tree, once charred and mute, grew pale blossoms in spring, white, with streaks of faint red along the petals, like faded veins. Birds returned. Children laughed again. No one remembered the red procession in full. Only whispers remained, like a bad dream worn smooth by time. Clara had not left. She lived alone in the cottage, where her mother once rocked silently by the fire. The wardrobe remained nailed shut. The floorboards were sealed. Salt lined the windowsills out of habit rather than fear. Her feet bore no scars now. Her hair had silvered early. She didn't dance anymore. But sometimes, at dusk, she would walk barefoot across the old chapel grounds. She'd pause by Lizette's grave and press her hand to the earth. "I carried you far enough," she'd whisper. "Now let me go." And each time the wind would answer, not in words, but with a hush, like the forest itself had exhaled. One autumn, a girl appeared, no older than 7, barefoot, as they always were. Her eyes were the colour of storm glass. She wore a tattered blue dress and carried a doll with no face. Clara met her at the gate. The girl stared at her for a long time, then said, "You're the one who stopped the dance." Clara didn't ask how she knew. Children always knew more than they were supposed to. "Where are your parents?" Clara asked. The girl shrugged. "Gone, or maybe not yet." Clara opened the gate. "Come in, I'll get you something warm." The girl stayed for 3 days. She never spoke of where she came from, never flinched at the mention of the past. She ate little, slept curled up at the base of the hearth, and when she thought Clara wasn't watching, she would hum. The melody was faint, but Clara knew it, not the full rhythm, not the pounding tempo that once consumed her, just an echo, a heartbeat's worth. On the 3rd night, Clara sat beside the girl and asked softly, "Do your feet ever move when you don't want them to?" The girl nodded. "Sometimes, in dreams." "Do they hurt?" "Not yet." Clara sighed. "Then there's still time." She went to the wardrobe, unnailed it, opened the door. The shoes were gone, only dust remained. But there, on the shelf, lay the doll her mother once stitched, the unfinished one, blank-faced, barefoot. Clara took it. She brought it to the hearth, sat with the girl, and together they began sewing. One stitch, then another, not with red thread, with grey, neutral, waiting. Clara taught the girl how to bind a figure, not in hunger, but in memory. How to sew close the spaces that curses try to slip through. They stitched until dawn. When the doll was finished, the girl took it in both hands. "It doesn't need to dance," she said. "No," Clara replied. "It only needs to stand still." They burned it beneath the wishing tree. The flames rose high and silver, and something shifted, not loudly, not with violence, but like a knot gently unthreading, a rhythm letting go. Clara felt it leave her chest, like breath held too long. That night she dreamed of Lisette, no longer a spectre of fire and blood, but a young woman in white, spinning alone in a quiet hall, not trapped, not angry, just dancing, free. Lisette turned to her and smiled, and then faded. Years later, they buried Clara beneath the tree, not because she had died in pain, but because she had earned the earth's rest. The girl, now grown, stood alone beside the grave. She wore soft grey shoes. She never danced, but she taught others how to walk, carefully, with choice, and in the wardrobe of her own home, she kept a box. Inside, a spool of black thread and a single golden pin. She never opened it, but she never threw it away, because some stories, no matter how dark, are worth remembering, just in case the music starts again.